Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. Naruto saved Tayuya, then betrayed Konoha for her, part 1. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, let's start. Chapter 1, Not Yet Dead. Tayuya wanted to be dead. She knew that she wasn't far from that fate either as she trudged through the forest. Her left arm hung limply at her side, the flesh torn apart and the bone mangled beyond any logical hope of reconstruction. Her breathing was labored and there was the recurring taste of blood in her mouth, side effects of what she knew was a couple of broken ribs. As if none of that was bad enough, she had also pretty much exhausted her chakra reserves. Turns out that the fact she had stayed back to fight wasn't as much of a pushover as she had expected. The chubby bastard had several tricks up his sleeve, one of which ended with her arm being crushed between a tree and the expanded cannonball form that he had taken. At the time, Tayuya had fully expected the kid to tear right through her, but he was as soft on the inside as he was physically. Still, her arm was completely now, and she wasn't even sure if she was walking in the right direction. Couldn't manage a simple retrieval mission. And now look at us. None of those better survive, or so help me, I'll choke them with their own insides. She yelled angrily, trying to distract herself from the blinding pain pulsating from her arm. Why the Orochimaru even care about the stupid emo tard? Just take the eyes. It's that simple. Cut the little mopey bitch out of the equation. She continued. But no, can't do that. Can't harm the merchandise, can we? Orochimaru needs another boy toy after all. Tayuya's increasingly staggered walk wound up with her tripping over herself and hitting the ground hard. She winced and grit her teeth in an attempt to force back her urge to scream as tears forced their way out of her eyes. The strained howl that came out of her was enough to help her push through the pain and stumble back to her feet again. Her vision had only gotten fuzzier, but she was determined, and, to quote Kitamura, more stubborn than an ox with a hard-on. She had to force herself not to chuckle at that, lest she risk doubling over in pain. In the back of her mind, she somewhat hoped that Kitamura had survived the mission. Despite being a complete and total tool, as well as a mild pervert, he was actually not too difficult to deal with. At least he retained a personality that wasn't completely focused on Orochimaru's or going all necrophilia on everyone that he killed. Although it wouldn't be a complete loss if he had died. If Tayuya was assuming correctly, the mission was a failure, so they would all get over anyway. Orochimaru had a thing about uselessness amongst his subordinates. Needless to say, the redhead was fairly certain she was walking to her death, or worse. Still, that didn't do much to deter her from her path. It wasn't as if she had much else in regards to options. She was dying at a steady pace now anyway, so why not just go and get it over with? Sure, she could just pull out a kunai and end it herself, but Tayuya refused to be a weak-willed sellout bitches to end it like that. As far as she was concerned, only pussies committed suicide. Even the whole concept of seppuku was just a bitch move by a coward. She tried to snort in amusement at her own thoughts, only for it to leave her in a coughing fit. Hacking up a few mouthfuls of blood, Tayuya once again collapsed to the ground. Spewing out a worrying amount of the thick crimson liquid, the girl let out what was supposed to be a growl. It came out a gurgled mess as she clawed angrily at the dirt, trying desperately to drag herself to her feet once more. In the end, she only managed to steady herself on her hand and knees. That fat cunt, she spat venomously. If she wasn't so absolutely sure that the fat cunt in question was already dead, then Tayuya would be making it her life mission to hunt him down and force-feed him his own lard-filled ass until he drowned on it. Thankfully, the had been soft, and now he was paying for that pathetic excuse of a shinobi's iron will with a kunai buried deep into his skull. If she hadn't gotten so badly injured, she would have enjoyed sticking around and having her summons bash his body into paste. Tayuya sat back on her haunches as she took a few calming breaths. Her vision was only getting worse as she moved, and there was a distinct ringing in her ears. She didn't recall hitting her head during her fight, but she couldn't exactly remember what broke her ribs either. If she had to hazard a guess, she would say she had a concussion of some sort. Just another injury to add to the list at this point, she supposed. Forcing herself to stand for yet another time, Tayuya continued to walk. As she went, she tore off a strip of cloth from her shirt, tying it tightly around her arm as a makeshift tourniquet. She knew that it would leave her arm completely dead after around 30 minutes, but it was a better alternative to bleeding to death. She was somewhat confident that Orochimaru could fix something as simple as a dead and broken arm, if he bothered to spare her life, that is. Despite knowing the Sanin's nature, Tayuya was strangely optimistic about it. An unnaturally strong breeze swept through the trees, causing Tayuya to sway precariously in a desperate attempt to stay off the ground. The redhead had already fallen too many times and she was certain that she would not get up from another. Disastrously, the breeze was merely a forewarning for the storm yet to come. The wind picked up violently as a raging wind jutsu tore through the area, ripping trees from the ground and throwing everything into airborne chaos. Tayuya was tossed around like a ragdoll, barely managing to use what strength and focus she had left to twist herself around and out of direct danger. She succeeded in keeping herself from getting crushed by the trees, for the most part, until the jutsu finally died down. But it wasn't over. Tayuya was dealt yet another significant blow as a blade of wind sliced deep into her side. Her would-be gasp was cut off, a stray tree branch slamming into her and sending her plummeting to the ground. As it would have it though, it seemed that fate wasn't quite done with its apparent tormenting of the girl. Her arm, flailing around as it was, became wedged in a forked branch of a toppled tree. The sudden jerking stop was enough to snap her tendons and rip her shoulder from its socket, giving the girl a new and intensely intimate understanding of suffering and agony. Tayuya screamed at the top of her lungs, tears flowing freely from her eyes as she clawed desperately at the tree branch, shredding her fingernails as she did so. She whimpered, her voice becoming brittle and shaken. Tayuya's crying led to another pain-filled coughing fit that once again ended with her tasting blood. The world spun around her, making her dizzy and tired. Letting herself go limp, Tayuya hung her head and stared at the ground. She almost laughed at seeing that she was hanging barely a foot off the ground, and yet it felt so far away in this moment. She wasn't unaware of the blood pooling below her either, her hand reaching up to clutch weakly at the gash in her side. Surprisingly enough, she couldn't really feel it, or anything else for that matter. Her body had gone almost completely numb. "Hey, so this is how I die," she muttered to herself. "Strung up like some slaughtered pig. The guys would piss themselves laughing if they could see me now." She regurgitated some more blood. How the am I still alive?" she whimpered. Logically speaking, she should have been dead by now. Tayuya wasn't exactly a large person, in fact, she was rather small for her age, and she knew she had lost more than enough blood to leave her dead. Perhaps it was just some sick joke. Life's way of making her suffer for the things she had done for Orochimaru. If that was the case, then it was definitely working. Tayuya had never felt so completely helpless in her life. Her body was broken, her mind was wavering between angry and distraught, and her life teetered on the edge of death. There was literally nothing that could make things worse. "Are you Tayuya of the North Gate?" The girl's eyes widened as she looked up. Her surprise only increased as her eyes finally managed to focus on the origin of the disembodied voice. It was a boy, barely a couple of years older than she was. He was just standing there, looking at her unsympathetically with his dark blue eyes. He didn't appear to be sporting any noticeable symbol of any hidden village, which struck her as odd. The rather expensive-looking katana that was tied to his waist also didn't help in making him appear to be possibly friendly. She didn't exactly have connections to anyone who could afford something like an expensive sword save for Orochimaru. "Am I hallucinating you?" Tayuya mumbled. The boy seemed to become thoughtful at that question, scratching at his dark red hair. "If I say yes, will you answer my question?" he asked curiously. Tayuya was too exhausted to really care at this point. She'd be dead quick enough, so it wouldn't hurt to humor the guy, even if she wasn't actually hallucinating him. "Who wants to know?" Pinching his chin lightly, the boy looked at Tayuya strangely. "Well, if I'm just a hallucination of yours, then I suppose you are the one that wants to know who you are," he said. "Perhaps, subconsciously, you aren't sure who you are inside. Maybe you should express yourself a little, get some dark secrets off your chest, like perhaps the location of your master," he continued with a hopeful expression, gesturing for her to spill the beans. Tayuya snarled and spat at him. "Go yourself, you prick. I ain't telling you nothing." He shrugged. "Oh well. It was worth a shot," he said casually. "Not every day that I find the person I'm looking for half dead. I just wanted to see how strong people's loyalty to Orochimaru were, He glanced at her oddly, apparently strong enough to disregard the fact that you're dying. I've been tracking your team as a whole, the boy replied calmly. The other 3, or rather 4, have already been, how should I put this, dealt with. That left you as my prime target. But, as you may have picked up, I say that in past tense because you seem to be stubborn, and I'm not one for torturing cute girls for information I can get from someone else. Tayuya growled. This guy had managed to break the record for how long it took someone to get on her shit list. It was one thing to call her cute, but it was an entirely different thing to disregard her for a different target because of her appearance. She would have been much happier had he used her near-dead condition as an excuse to not bother with her. What does that mean? You think you're too good to hurt me? Think that just because I'm a girl I need to be treated like glass? She not been so angry and focused solely on the boy. Tayuya might have wondered where she was getting the energy to even argue with him, or at least gone back to wondering why she wasn't dead yet. The boy just shook his head. I wouldn't call it morality, he said, pointing to his ears. I just hate high-pitched squealing. Really hurts my ears and isn't worth the results to put up with it for long. Tayuya's eyes lit up and she grinned viciously. Pulling what small amount of chakra remained in her system to her control, she molded it up into her mouth. Pursing her lips into position, the redhead let out a sharp chakra-imbued whistle. The boy was quick to recoil at the sound, jerking his head as if he had been punched. He stumbled and swayed clumsily as he tried to shake his head free of the sudden dizziness. Tayuya waited in anticipation for him to hit the ground like a sack of bricks, but it didn't happen. Almost as suddenly as it had occurred, the boy's dizziness vanished, leaving him standing in front of the girl with a painful ringing in his ears, but even that was short-lived. How are you still conscious? Tayuya demanded. Her technique, despite having been used with such little chakra, should have been enough to blow his eardrums and leave him a discombobulated mess, if not knock him out completely. The boy shook his head again and stared at her with intrigue. That's a little surprising, he walked up to her, catching her free hand as she lashed out at him. Seems you could be useful after all. Tayuya was about to scream at him some more before she felt a blinding pain burn its way into her side, right where her gash was. While not in any way comprehensible, she did manage to scream, albeit in pain more than anger. Her attempts at thrashing around were halted as she felt her body being unnaturally disobedient to her will. It didn't last long, and soon the boy was stepping back from her panting and twitching form. That should keep you from bleeding out for a little while, he said, turning his attention to the tourniquet on her trapped arm. Grabbing it, he pulled it tighter. Ah! Tayuya screamed. Fucking stop it, she pleaded, once again crying. Just kill me, you bastard. Her eyes widened as he stepped back and drew his sword, the steel of the blade seemingly gleaming at her hungrily. Tayuya closed her eyes tightly as she prepared for what she assumed would be her death. However, instead of the expected pain of being slashed, or stabbed, she experienced a sudden sensation of weightlessness, followed very quickly by pain as she crumpled to the ground. She grit her teeth and tried to hold back her pained howl, only for it to come out a gurgled and spluttering mess as she cried into the ground. Tayuya felt herself get turned over roughly. Opening her eyes, she stared fearfully into the dark blue eyes of the boy, not finding a hint of sympathy or warmth in them. His eyes shifted their focus, and her eyes followed, landing on her mangled arm. She could tell that he saw it as a lost cause, but his opinion didn't really matter to her. There was no doubt in her mind that Orochimaru could fix her. She just needed to survive this ordeal, in whatever way she could. The boy frowned and shook his head in disappointment. Your arm is beyond help. It'll get infected the way it is, and I can't afford for you to simply die before you tell me everything you know, he explained. The kunoichi felt her stomach sink. The boy wasted no time in denying her a chance to argue or attempt anything rash, grabbing her unbroken right arm and using it to flip her back onto her stomach, twisting the limb up behind her back as he went. Tayuya yelped and screamed in protest, finally getting some sort of idea as to what he intended to do. His solution to this was to gag her with a torn-off piece of her shirt. Resting his knee on her right arm, he kept it pressed against her back and kept her from wriggling out of position as he went about positioning her mangled mess of a left arm. Happy with his preparations, the boy stood back up, replacing his knee on Tayuya's back with his foot. Picking his sword back up from the ground next to him, he lowered the blade to the girl's arm and readied himself, raising the sword up above his head. Tayuya screamed into her makeshift gag desperately, tears streaming down her face as she tried to thrash around, but to no avail. The boy simply put more weight down on her, causing her to whimper pitifully. She watched in morbid horror as he brought the sword down in a clean slash. At first she didn't feel it, but soon the burning pain set in, along with the realization that her arm was now definitely gone, severed just above her elbow. Unfortunately, Tayuya's torment wasn't over as the boy knelt down again, leading to a familiar burning pain in what was left of her arm. In the end, Tayuya's mind couldn't handle the stress anymore, and the redhead passed out from the pain. Naruto stared down at the unconscious form of Tayuya. To be honest, even he was surprised that she was still alive, let alone only just now passing out. Then again, it shouldn't have really surprised him all that much. Orochimaru was not one to assign the weak to his personal guard. While not exactly what Naruto would call strong, the Sound Four were definitely not weak, Tayuya especially it seemed. Rolling her back onto her back, Naruto inspected her wounds. The dodgy job he did of cauterizing the gash on her side and the stump of her arm would hold up for a little while, but eventually she would die from internal wounds. She would need proper medical attention soon, and it would need to be of top quality too. Naruto knew where he was, and he also knew that Konoha was the closest village that met the requirements, but he wasn't exactly sure if he wanted to go there just yet. He looked back down at Tayuya and sighed, wiped his blood-covered hands on his black pants and collected his sword, sheathing it back at his waist. Making a few hand seals, he bit his thumb and placed his hand on the ground. With a puff of smoke, a small toad appeared in front of him. "Go tell the Hokage that I'll be dropping in for a visit. Tell her that I'll need a medical team ready on arrival for a guest," he said. The toad seemed to look up at him strangely. "You're going to Konoha?" it asked in shock. Naruto nodded. "Make sure to tell Ma and Pa to keep Jiraiya out of the loop. I don't need him interfering with my business any more than absolutely necessary." The toad nodded in understanding before dispelling. Naruto let out an exaggerated sigh. Picking up Tayuya's limp form, he positioned her on his back as best he could and went about his slow journey towards Konoha. He almost felt the need to shed a tear at the slow demise of his dark orange shirt as Tayuya's blood began drenching and staining it. Still, he wasn't going to leave her. She was now far too important to let die, or worse, return to Orochimaru's clutches. "Never thought I'd find another Uzumaki, especially not like this," he mumbled to himself. Should have figured that Orochimaru would have gotten his hands on at least one of them. While not positive that she was an Uzumaki, Naruto wasn't going to let the chance slip by. Her red hair was one indication, but these days that wasn't a sure defining trait. Her chakra though, had been what really piqued Naruto's interest. It shared a couple of notable similarities with his own, similarities that he knew were more or less not present in the majority of the population of the elemental nations. He would get the Hokage to do a full blood test to verify for him, but until then, he would consider Tayuya to be an Uzumaki. "Well, this is going to be one hell of an interesting coming home party," Naruto said. Needless to say, Naruto was not looking forward to seeing Konoha again, at least not this soon. Chapter 2, Home Sweet Home. Naruto didn't slow down as he walked through the main gates of the village. Going through the time-consuming process of being processed would be, well, time-consuming. He was in a little bit of a hurry, so it really just wasn't worth the fuss. That, and the longer it took people to recognize him, the better. Even if it was only a few minutes worth of peace gained in doing so. The fact that the gate guards were already drawing their weapons only meant that said time of peace was drawing to a very quick close. Coming to a sudden stop, the teen was quickly surrounded by 7 Anbu, each with the edge of a blade pressed gently against all of his accessible vital points. Surrounding them were no less than 13 Anbu, all readied and prepared for anything. Naruto was flattered. To think that such attention and forethought was put into something as simple as his presence. It was almost as if they truly feared him. "Good reaction time, guys," he said. "And girls," he added, noticing a few mask-covered glares from the females of the group. "Although I must say, this is entirely unnecessary. I even sent a message ahead of me to avoid this exact situation." "You will be silent," one of the Anbu said. The Hokage will be the one to say what happens to you once she arrives. Naruto nodded. Fair enough. But it still would have been much better had you just let me go straight to her in the first place, he said, making a slow gesture to their surroundings. This particular course of action has caught the attention of a crowd. The surrounding Anbu were quick to take notice of the encroaching civilians, all eager to see what the fuss was all about. Many were quick to disperse of their own accord after seeing the bloodied and crippled form of Tayuya resting on Naruto's back. Those that stayed in spite of such a sight were quickly ordered to leave by the Anbu, not that they listened. As it were, the civilians didn't actually have to take orders from shinobi. It was more of a guideline, accepted and respected, but not actually enforced. It took a few moments, time in which Naruto remained guarded by the unflappable group of overly serious Anbu, but eventually a new face made itself known to the group. A blonde woman wearing a green Haori jacket, a strange violet gem embedded into her forehead, and an annoyed but analytical expression. She seemed to observe Naruto's scrutiny singly, as if not quite sold on him being who she thought he was, until eventually her eyes stopped on the unmistakable whisker-like marking on the boy's cheeks. Her expression softened as she looked up at the redhead. "You've gotten taller," she said, trying to ease the tension. "And you've gotten older," Naruto replied without hesitation. "Might want to look into giving that genjutsu a little update, Tsunade." Tsunade didn't react. She didn't glare at him, nor did she lash out violently. She simply took the comments in stride as she continued to stare at the teen, seemingly looking for something that appeared to missing. Eventually her attention turned to the girl on his back, noticing her less than lively appearance, as well as the extensive amount of blood that now covered most of Naruto's back. A mere glance was all it took for Tsunade to label the girl as a lost cause, but she couldn't, in her right mind, let that stop her from trying. Not when it would give Naruto a reason to stick around. "We are still in the process of treating a team that came back from a bad mission," the blonde explained. "We will do what we can for the girl, but I make no promises." "Then stop talking about it. If you insist that I need a permanent guard, then they can follow us to the hospital," Naruto said emotionlessly. Tsunade gave a nod to the Anbu, ordering them to stand down before heading off towards the hospital, Naruto following behind her. She sighed mentally, glancing back at his cold blue eyes. It was going to be a long night. The Hokage was not wrong in her assumption of a long night. The mission to retrieve Sasuke Uchiha could only be described as a complete disaster. The medical records were all one needed to see to know that much. With two young clan members now dead, one from the Akamichi clan, and the other from the Hyuga, it was unlikely that Sasuke would be receiving any more sympathy from either clan from now on. The stupid little brat had finally drawn the last straw. However, Tsunade knew that it meant nothing. The elders, along with Danzo, would see to it that all was swept under the rug, the blame taken off of Sasuke at all cost. After all, it would be unwise and foolish to let such a valuable Kekkei Genkei slip away so easily. Had this been a time of war, Tsunade would almost be inclined to agree with them. The Sharingan would be too valuable. But, as she signed off on the death certificates of the two boys, each barely in their teens, the Hokage had to wonder just how far things had to go before the line was finally drawn. Forcing herself to focus more on the surviving members of the team, Tsunade still wasn't too pleased with the outcome. The Nara clan heir was the best off, physically that is. The psychological blow he took with the loss of his Akamichi friend was proving to be extreme. The Inuzuka had been roughed up rather badly, one of his more dire wounds having been self-inflicted, strangely enough. The Aburame boy was suffering from mild chakra exhaustion, multiple bone fractures, and some severe contusions, but was otherwise okay considering he had been the one to confront Sasuke himself. One of the more worrying cases was that of Rock Lee, a boy who by all means should not have even been out of his hospital room in the first place, but even he was stable medically. There were also 3 extra medical check records that Tsunade was required to look over, each one being of the 3-man Suna team sent to aid in the mission. How Suna even knew of the mission, let alone managed to send a team to assist so quickly, was something the Hokage would have to look into at a later date. It smelt fishy, but considering it stopped her from signing off an entire generation of clan heirs as dead, she would allow it to slide. After the incident during the Chunin exams, it made sense that Suna would be prepared to pounce at any chance it got to redeem itself in the eyes of Konoha. While both sides had lost a powerful cage in the overall event, it was Konoha that took the brunt of the hit. The Ikibi's rampage resulted in more deaths and destruction than could be simply overlooked. It was only by the divine mercy of Konoha that Suna even had its Jinchuriki returned to them, although it was more due to the lack of any potential new Jinchuriki, and the unstable nature of the current one. That in the village would tear the boy apart had he been kept around. Still, despite the animosity she held towards Suna, Tsunade was thankful for the help. If there was one thing she had learnt from her late sensei, it was how to move on from things, even if it took far too long to actually learn, and resulted in her losing more than she could ever imagine. She idly reached for the crystal necklace around her neck. Sometimes she really wished she had never inherited her grandfather's love of gambling. Then maybe she wouldn't have left so many important things to chance, and perhaps not have lost them in the process. Taking a deep breath, Tsunade calmed herself. Walking through the hospital halls, she was not all that surprised to see many of the nurses and doctors were exhausted. While it had not been an exceptionally busy night, many of the staff had been working non-stop for the past several weeks, tending to the numerous patients wounded during the Chunin exams. It had only been recently that the hospital had finally stabilized itself, only for another, albeit smaller, incident to occur. Making her way to a more private room in the ICU sector, Tsunade let the two Anbu guarding the door leave before entering herself. The girl that Naruto had brought in was something of a miracle. The doctors that had been assigned to her were fully expecting her to die on the operating table, yet she persevered. She was still in a less than okay condition, but at least she didn't have the Shinigami breathing down her neck anymore. Still, Tsunade figured that there was more to the girl than there appeared, a suspicion brought about by the simple fact that it was Naruto to bring her in. Speaking of the boy, he was standing in the corner of the room, his eyes set keenly on the sleeping form of the girl. It would have almost been a cute scene had there been any warmth in his eyes, but his attention seemed to be more observational and calculating than caring. "So, who is she? Your girlfriend?" Tsunade inquired, hoping to get some sort of reaction out of him. Naruto didn't even glance at her. "No," he answered simply. "Then who is she? I need a name to put on her medical records," the Hokage said. "Don't make any records then," the redhead countered. Tsunade sighed. She knew this wasn't going to be easy. "I see you're still keeping your hair red. No doubt your mother would be proud," she said with an attempted smile. "My mother is dead, Tsunade," Naruto replied coldly. "The hair is simply to keep Iwa off my back." He turned to look at her blankly. "Care to try at any more conversation topics?" The blonde looked at him sadly. "Naruto, I know we aren't on the best terms. We aren't on any terms. You know me, I know you. That is it. Come on, Naruto. I'm trying here," Tsunade pleaded softly. The teen glared at her. "Don't you dare," he said. "Trying now means nothing when you didn't even try when I needed it. You and Jiraiya lost any and all rights to forgiveness with your negligence." Tsunade looked down shamefully. "All right then," she said softly. "The girl is stable now. I wouldn't recommend moving her for at least a week, but she should be fine for travel within a couple of weeks, if you intend to take her with you, that is." Naruto turned his attention back to the girl. "That is why I am here. I need you to test her blood. Her chakra as well if necessary," he explained. "What exactly are you trying to find?" the blonde asked curiously. "Look for any traces of Uzumaki DNA, along with any signs in her chakra to indicate her as such." Tsunade quirked an eyebrow. Looking at the girl, she could somewhat tell how she could pass off as an Uzumaki. The hair was right, as was the miraculous survival of otherwise fatal injuries and chakra exhaustion. But Tsunade still wasn't sold on the idea. Apparently, Naruto wasn't either. While not exactly happy with his attitude towards her, the Hokage wasn't going to refuse Naruto. Such action would only garner more of his ire. "I'll do the tests, but they will take time," she said. "A day at least to get reasonably accurate results, and another 2 before I can clear her as not being in any real danger anymore. I can work on her recovery personally and move her discharge forward to 4 days, but that is the best I can do for her. She will still have to stay in the village for a little while so I can keep an eye on her. Take all the time you need." Just make sure you're thorough. I don't intend to waste time on her if she isn't at least part Uzumaki. The Hokage nodded in understanding, holding back her desire to point out that she herself was part Uzumaki. Such a statement would not end well in the long run of things. I had a room prepared for you at a nearby hotel. It will be available to you for so long as you are in the village. Is there anything else you need, Naruto? She asked. I'll need an updated copy of Konoha's bingo book, he said, giving the woman an odd look. Although I wonder, will that Uchiha I passed on the way here be included in it now? He didn't seem to have held back on that Aburame by the looks of things. Good thing the kid gave in before he got killed. Tsunade's eyes widened. You passed Sasuke. Naruto shrugged. I guess. Didn't pay much attention to him. His chakra was distinct though. I'm assuming it was Itachi's little brother. Yes, it was. There was an incident. As far as we know, he has defected with the intention of joining Orochimaru. As you probably already know, the team we sent to retrieve him did not succeed. The teen's eye twitched slightly. I probably should have killed the kid then, he said before sighing. Oh well, I'll just do it later. I doubt he will be added to the bingo books, Tsunade stated. The elders won't allow Sasuke to be killed. He is, in a sense, under the same circumstances as you are. Naruto scoffed. Doubt it. Not that I really care. If he really has sided with Orochimaru, then he'll die soon enough anyway. He always has wanted those eyes. Tsunade knew that the boy was probably right. Her old teammate had been lusting after the Sharingan for years now, so it made sense that Sasuke would be his prime target. And now, with the Uchiha walking right into his hands, there was very little doubt in the Hokage's mind that Sasuke would come out second best. A prodigy he might have been, even if barely, but that amounted to nothing when faced with someone of Orochimaru's prowess. It was just a waiting game now, to see just when and how the snake would reveal his new shiny skin to the world. Letting her thoughts drift back to Naruto, she took interest in what he had said regarding passing Sasuke on the way here. If he had also seen the condition of the Aburame boy, then it stood to reason that Naruto had followed the path of destruction made by the retrieval team. Glancing at the girl he had brought in, she turned to look at the boy suspiciously. Where exactly did you find this girl? She asked. Hanging from a tree, Naruto answered. Naruto, was she one of the ones that assisted in Sasuke's escape? Tsunade questioned. He shrugged again. Probably. Didn't actually see much in regards to the fighting. Why does it matter? If she helped in the aid of Sasuke Uchiha's escape, then I will be forced to take her into custody. She will be tried for her crimes and punished accordingly. Considering that she is alive in the first place indicates that she was one of the two that killed two of Konoha's genin. The clans of the deceased will want to make sure that she is executed, Tsunade explained. Well then, I guess it would be best for you to keep your mouth shut until the tests are completed. If she is in fact an Uzumaki, then she falls under my clan's protection, Naruto said. Tsunade shook her head. She is not a registered shinobi or civilian of Konoha, and neither are you to an extent. There will be nothing stopping the clans from putting a bounty on her head. Even if she is an Uzumaki, that is nothing more than a name now, a simple legend in our history. So, what you're saying is that even now, with a Senju once again taking the mantle as Hokage, the Uzumaki are not properly respected by this village, he said coldly. I could understand Hiruzen's reasoning for covering things up. It was pathetic and dishonorable, but I could understand his intentions, which for the most part were decent in nature. But, I cannot see why his mistakes have not been corrected after so long. You'd think 13 years is enough time to sort things out. It's not as if my identity is a secret anymore. Many of the laws he created have been annulled, including the cover-up of the Uzumaki clan's history with Konoha. That being said, one boy isn't enough to keep a clan, even the Uzumaki, in the system. Oh really? Tsunade chastised herself mentally, knowing the flaws in her words the moment they left her mouth. Then I suppose I should apologize for referring to you as a Senju. Clearly you cannot hold the clan name, being the only living member. And I guess that Uchiha, Sasuke or whatever, also doesn't get his clan name. How amusing. Konoha just lost 3 of its most prominent clans in the time frame of about 30 seconds. Be sure to explain that little tidbit of information to the elders the next time they try and renounce my clan status. The Hokage sighed deeply. I'm too tired to argue with you, Naruto. I'll keep quiet until the tests are complete, but once the results are in, I will be required to inform the elders, and the clans, about this girl's involvement with the mission. What happens to her after that is dependent on how far you wish to take things. Walking over to the hospital bed, Tsunade took a small sample of the girl's blood before giving her one last overlook. Happy with her condition, she walked back to the door and walked out, only to look back at Naruto. Come to my office tomorrow evening. I should have the results by then. Other than that, I merely ask that you try not to cause any trouble while you're here. He grunted in response. And Naruto, she looked down sadly. It's nice to see you again, she said softly, closing the door as she left. Naruto remained silent and unmoving for a few minutes afterwards, simply staring at Tayuya. Eventually, he gave in and sighed, walking out from the corner of the room and moving the window. You had better be worth this, girl, he said. You have no idea how annoying things are going to get for me once they figure out who you are. But, if you are actually an Uzumaki, his eyes softened slightly. Then I'll make sure you're worth it, he whispered softly. Believe it. Chapter 3, Test Results. Naruto was, for a lack of better words, bored. Despite having not been within Konoha for just over 13 years, there was almost nothing that had changed in a way to incite his interest. A lot of the village was actually still being rebuilt from the Ikibi's rampage. Personally, Naruto found it strange that a Jinchuriki was able to get so far into a rampage in the first place. Konoha was only recognized as the strongest village due to its history with the beasts, or more accurately, its habit of having shinobi that were unnaturally adept at containing or controlling them. The concept of the weakest of the Biju causing so much destruction before someone among the plethora of legendary shinobi managed to put a stop to it sounded almost laughable. Still, the aftermath was not something Naruto could laugh at. Even if he disliked the village, there were too many innocents being affected. Only someone as sadistic as Orochimaru could really be pleased at the destruction of an entire village. But, that didn't mean that the redhead couldn't take a little bit of enjoyment in the fact that everyone was too busy to notice his presence half the time. As it were, he had been walking around the village mindlessly for a good majority of the day. Actually, he had been at it since late last night. Needless to say, Naruto wasn't at all surprised to find that the hotel room provided so affectionately by Tsunade was being watched by Anbu. He had never intended on staying in it, but after finding all of the Anbu assigned to keeping tabs on him, he just couldn't resist messing with them. And so, it stood to reason that the majority of the Anbu that had been following him for the past several hours were about ready to call it quits. Naruto would have been tempted to continue the game longer, all week if he was dedicated enough, but having lapped the village so many times already, he was getting bored. Deciding to give up, Naruto headed to the one place that he actually wanted to visit in the village. It took a while, and an awful amount of dawdling in a futile attempt to lose his tail, but eventually he did reach his destination. All in all, Konoha's cemetery wasn't a flashy place, and it didn't need to be. If there was one thing that Konoha was good at, it was respecting the dead, most of the time. There were a few exceptions depending on one's opinion on how far respect should go. The attempted cover-up of Naruto's existence and connection to his parents was one thing that could easily be seen as disrespectful, with the subsequent removal of the Uzumaki clan history being another. Thankfully, both had been very short-lived in the scheme of things. The teen walked lazily through the cemetery until he happened upon the two grave sites that he had been intending to visit. Each was just as simple and elegant as the others were. Not even a symbol out of place to distinguish them is more important. Sitting down on the grass in front of them, Naruto stared intently at the names. Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki. His parents. The two people who he knew loved him unconditionally, yet also the same two people who bestowed a terrible burden onto him. A burden that nearly cost him his existence, in more ways than one. Glancing over to the side, he saw a blank space next to his parents' graves. And here I thought that I would remain dead in the eyes of this village, he drawled. A little difficult considering that you are still alive, someone said from behind him. Naruto raised an eyebrow at the voice. I was also under the impression that you spent most of your time at the memorial stone, not the cemetery. Kakashi walked up and stood next to the boy. Most of the time I do, he replied. but I thought I would make an exception today. After all, the dead aren't going anywhere. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I ignored you over them, not when I have so much to make up for." He looked sideways at Naruto with his one visible eye. "I like the hair, by the way. How long did it take them before they finally got rid of it?" the teen asked curiously. A little while. The Sandaime wanted to try and maintain the cover-up for as long as possible. In a way, I think he believed it would help you out a little. Keep you safe, you know, until you established yourself outside of the village, Kakashi answered. But eventually he had to let the truth out. The village somewhat fell apart after Itachi slaughtered the Uchiha clan. Telling them that you were still alive was a decent distraction from things. Naruto frowned. I shouldn't have been dead in the first place. The Jonin sighed. I know. And I am partly to blame for letting it happen. I should have seen the flaws in the Sandaime's plan. Perhaps I could have persuaded him to not go through with it. Naruto yawned. Well, there's nothing you can do about it now. Probably best that you stop dwelling on the past, he said. Kakashi took notice of Naruto's tired voice. Combined with his slouched posture, and his half-lidded stare, the boy seemed in need of a good rest. I take it you didn't sleep well last night, he commented. Haven't slept yet, Naruto replied with a smirk. Going on 3 days now, actually. Been a little preoccupied with some of my recent targets. That, and I was having a little fun leading the Anbu around on a mind-numbing wander. I can assure you that they weren't Tsunade's idea, Kakashi said. The elders, along with some of the clans, aren't too comfortable with letting you wander the village as you please. Taking your profession into consideration, I don't think I blame them. It's not like I'm going to kill anyone inside the village. That would be stupid and suicidal. Kakashi hummed thoughtfully. True. But you could have very well been hired to do other forms of dirty work. I understand that stealing clan secrets and techniques is one of the things you did for another village. Naruto shrugged. There was a lot of money involved. I wasn't exactly in a position to reject the offer at the time. I'm not judging you for it. I have no right to. After all, my hands aren't exactly clean either. I'm just trying to justify the actions of the village. Whether you like it or not, you have amassed an interesting reputation over the past few years. It only makes sense that people would be suspicious of you. I don't really care what they think, or how suspicious they are. It only makes things worse when I can't even sleep with the comfort of knowing I'm not being watched like a hawk, the boy groaned. And to think, all of this crap, just because my parents put a giant demon fox in my stomach. There were a few awkward moments of silence, followed by the near-audible sound of Kakashi deadpanning at the boy. You do realize that the fox isn't actually in your stomach, right? The Jonin asked. Naruto's eye twitched. Yes, Kakashi, I am aware. Kakashi merely smiled. Just making sure. You were a bit young when you left. Who knows what sort of crazy things could have made their way into that little head of yours. Naruto's eye twitched more violently. I suddenly remember one of my reasons for leaving this place, he growled. Really? As if to spite him, the Jonin's eye smile seemed to intensify. I hate you. Tsunade smiled as she watched Naruto and Kakashi interact. While the Jonin did need to be encouraged to do so, it was obvious that he was glad to finally speak with the boy. Canceling the jutsu, she placed the crystal ball back in a drawer of her desk before resting her chin on her hands. She glanced sideways at the small file on the edge of her desk. The medical report that contained a decent amount of information on the girl that Naruto had brought with him. There was absolutely no doubt in the Hokage's mind that the girl was Orochimaru's subordinate, which only made things more complicated. Naturally, her first course of action should have been to have the girl arrested and moved to the criminal sector of the hospital, but she couldn't find the willpower to do it. If she did, then she would certainly be jeopardizing any possible hope of fixing her relationship with Naruto, but if she didn't, then it could lead to a negative reaction from the clans. The elders were going to react badly to the whole situation anyway, so Tsunade didn't even bother counting them in the scheme of things. Giving up on the mental battle of morals, Tsunade decided to wait until she told Naruto everything before she thought about making a decision on what to do with the girl. With the reputation the young Uzumaki had earned, it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that he was merely trying to find out the girl's worth before selling her to Konoha. A smart move considering the bounty that the Akamichi clan would no doubt place on her head. Naruto would be looking at a small fortune should that be his plan. Still, there was always the chance that he would want to keep the girl. What his intentions with her would be, Tsunade wasn't entirely sure, and she didn't really feel like assuming either. Needless to say, the Hokage's understanding of boys, even of Naruto's age, combined with the obvious physical appeal the girl possessed, didn't add up to the prettiest of pictures. While she could hope that he was a better man than that, it was still a possible scenario. Sighing deeply, Tsunade closed her eyes. I'm getting too old for this. Don't say that. You're still as beautiful as ever, Tsunade. The blonde held back the urge to growl. Now is not a good time for you to be here, Jiraiya, she said irritably. The man in question was quick to lose his otherwise goofy attitude. Not moving from his perch on the windowsill, he looked out over the village. So, he's still mad as hell I take it, he said disappointedly. Did you really think he wouldn't be? Tsunade retorted. The forewarn message he sent me with a toad specifically said that you were not to be told about his being in the village. Which begs the question, just what in the hell are you doing here? Jiraiya frowned. I'm still his godfather, whether he likes it or not. Even if the toads aren't happy with how I went about things, they aren't quite prepared to lie to me for Naruto's sake. Tsunade sneered. So basically, they told you that Naruto wanted to keep you out of the loop, and you decided to come here anyway, she said. And in what stupid part of your mind did you think that was a good idea? The toad sage glared at her lightly. So what? You get to see him and I don't. You moron. He only even looks at me because I'm the Hokage. He is only here because he needed my help with something. If it wasn't for that, I'm sure he'd still be happily leading you on a wild goose chase through the elemental nations, Tsunade said angrily. Why can't you just grow up for once and realize that barging into things like this is not a good idea? How else am I supposed to do it? The man asked. He wants nothing to do with me. How am I supposed to see him if I don't impose on moments like this? From what I understand, he's stuck here for a little while, and that gives me time to keep an eye on him. Tsunade growled. Your meddling is going to set him off. As soon as he catches wind of you being here, he might drop everything and vanish again. The elders still want him contained to the village, which you know damn well isn't going to happen. Are you going to pick up the pieces after he's torn his way through our shinobi to get his freedom? Maybe it would be for the best, Jiraiya said. Akatsuki is becoming more active. It's only a matter of time before they make a move. The longer that Naruto continues with this lone wolf act, the more danger he is in. If we can just keep him here, at least until I'm sure he can protect himself from them, that would better than nothing. The Hokage grit her teeth, gripping her desk hard enough to strain the wood. I will not allow you to hold Naruto here against his will. I am the Hokage, and this is my village. No one, not even you, will lay a hand on Naruto while I'm in charge. If you try to keep him here, by any means, I will have you stripped of your titles and shinobi rank, she said bitterly. Jiraiya looked at her sternly. You're really going to let him leave? I'm keeping tabs on a group of S-rank criminals that are showing interest in the Jinchuriki, and you're just going to abandon him because you don't feel like making a hard decision to protect him. Tsunade smiled sadly. I already abandoned him. We both did. I'm simply sticking to my original mistake for the sake of a good cause, she said softly. If there is one thing I do right with my life, it's making sure I never do wrong by Naruto ever again. And besides, I think it's about time that we told him about the Akatsuki. If he chooses to stay here for his own safety, then good. But if not, then that's okay. We shouldn't be giving him the option at all. He isn't ready for this. If we don't keep him here, if I don't train him, then he won't stand a chance. Maybe he will. We don't know, and we certainly don't have the right to decide for him. Sarutobi already tried that approach, and we both know how it turned out, Tsunade said. Maybe it'll be best if we just admit defeat on this one. Naruto deserves his freedom, and if he wants to die, then he is free to do so on his own terms. The best we can do is be here for him if he decides he needs us. Jiraiya shook his head in disappointment. I'm not prepared to let my godson die because of his own arrogance. If the Akatsuki get a hold of the Kyuubi, it will only end in death and destruction. As the Hokage, you should be putting the safety of the village before your own feelings. Naruto needs to be contained here. Tsunade turned and glared at him. Naruto is not a shinobi of Konoha. He is not bound under my authority, or yours. He can do as he pleases, and that is exactly how it will remain. You are not to do anything to interfere with him at all. That is an order, Jiraiya. If you go against it, I swear, I will personally see to it that you regret coming back here. Jiraiya continued to stare at the Hokage sternly before turning away with a grunt. Fine, have it your way. But once he's out of the village, even you can't stop me from protecting him. If his reputation is legitimate, then I won't have to, Tsunade countered. Now, get out of my village before Naruto learns that you're here. I'm about to have more than enough problems to deal with without him being any angrier at me. The sage went to leave, only to stop suddenly and look back at Tsunade. I understand that Naruto brought a girl here with him. Apparently she was in bad shape, which is probably the thing he needed help with. Who is she? Tsunade sighed. I have no idea. Naruto wouldn't say, she lied. Not that it matters anymore. The girl passed away overnight. I have only waited so long to tell Naruto in hopes that he would find a reason to stay here for a while. He will most likely leave in the night after I give him the news. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes suspiciously. That's too bad, he grumbled, dropping out of the window and making his way out of Konoha, leaving Tsunade alone in her office. Neither of the two renowned shinobi took notice of a tiny toad, barely out of its tadpole stage in life, dispelling itself from its hiding place in a bookshelf. Naruto stared at the toad before him in disbelief. He knew that the Hokage's office had lax security as far as cage offices went, but he was actually astounded at how bad Konoha's was. Getting a toad in there was apparently the hard part, because once it was in, not a single person even found it before its mission was complete. To be completely honest with himself, Naruto almost felt like the accomplishment was cheating on his part. Still, the information he had received was worth a little cheating in the long term. While still pissed off at the toads for selling him out, he was somewhat sated by the knowledge of Tsunade so readily opposing Jiraiya for his sake. It was actually rather interesting to see just how devoted the woman was to making up for her mistakes with him. She was actually going to much greater lengths than Naruto had anticipated, and from the sounds of things, she was prepared to go further. The direct lies to her own teammate were of significance in that regard. While Tsunade didn't actually know that Tayuya was in fact one of Orochimaru's personal guard, she wasn't stupid enough to have not picked up on the girl's true identity. But she was still telling Jiraiya the half-truth about not knowing who she was, since Naruto still had yet to confirm anything. The real lie came with claiming that Tayuya had died overnight, which was definitely not true since Naruto was currently sitting at the end of her hospital bed. While her appearance was a little deceiving of the fact, she was still most certainly alive. Dismissing his summons, Naruto adopted a thoughtful expression. His presence in the village was already causing problems at an alarming rate, and it was pretty much gospel that more problems would have wormed their way into the works of things by the end of the day. That gave the Jinchuriki approximately a week or so before things completely turned upside down and he would be forced to leave for the sake of the natural order. Thankfully, if he was able to guilt-trip Tsunade into working overtime, he could be gone before things got really bad. The door opened suddenly to reveal the livid expression of a boy, his eyes set almost exclusively on Tayuya. Or maybe the bad stuff could come barging right through the door, Naruto thought to himself. Shit. The boy wasted little time in identifying Tayuya before pulling out a kunai. Naruto was just as quick to put himself between the boy and Tayuya, not entirely sure as to what was happening, but not willing to let the girl die before he knew if she was worth caring about. The boy seemed to have already planned ahead for Naruto's intervention, his hands joining in a seal before his shadow speared out towards the Jinchuriki's own shadow. Naruto was left immobilized, watching as the boy made a break towards Tayuya, kunai gripped tightly in his hand. Flaring his chakra, Naruto overpowered the boy's technique, spinning around in time to grab him by the collar of his shirt and yank him back before he reached the girl. In his rage, the boy spun around as well, only to blindly drive his kunai deep into Naruto's stomach. Whether it was reality finally catching up to him, or perhaps the sensation of the blood soaking through his fingers, something seemed to knock the boy back to his senses in time to admire his handiwork. Letting go of the kunai, the boy stared at his shaky hands before looking up fearfully at the cold blue eyes of his unintended victim. Naruto, for the most part, didn't care about being stabbed. It happened surprisingly often in his line of work, and it hadn't even gone all the way through, so it would heal quite quickly so long as he didn't exhaust himself somehow. What he did care about though, was what reason the boy had for barging in as he had in attempting to kill Tayuya. Before he could question the kid, a new presence made itself known as a man raced into the room. He looked like an older and battered version of the kid, so Naruto made an instant connection of relation. That being said though, Naruto also recognized the man as the head of the Nara clan, which would mean the kid he was holding was more than likely also a Nara. Considering that Tayuya had just recently killed either an Akamichi or a Hyuga, the latter seeming a little unlikely for her, then it stood to reason that the girl had probably killed this kid's friend and teammate. A generation of the Inoshika Cho team grouping being abruptly put to an end. "Is this yours?" Naruto asked in a bored tone, shocking both the kid and his apparent father. The man in question seemed more focused on the kunai stuck in Naruto's gut, along with the blood that covered his son's hand. Shikamaru, what have you done?" he asked in horror. Naruto carelessly threw the boy to his father. "Get out. If I catch you trying to kill her again, I'll kill you myself," he said casually, pulling out the kunai from his stomach and tossing it to the still stunned father. "And don't forget to take that with you. Shikaku." The three all turned to stare at Tsunade with varying expressions as she walked in on the scene. Naruto maintained his bored disposition, but did harden his gaze at the Hokage's appearance. Even if she had intrigued him with her decision to lie to Jiraiya, he wasn't going to let her get off that easily. Shikaku and Shikamaru, for the most part, were just looking at the Hokage in silent horror. Shikamaru was still in mild shock, and his father was in the middle of racing through every possible lie or excuse he could think of to get his son off the hook. Tsunade observed the situation rather quickly before setting her eyes on Shikamaru. "Brat, you had better have one damn good explanation for this," she said, her voice holding a tone of warning. That was enough to force Shikamaru back to reality. He grit his teeth angrily, pointing accusingly at the still sleeping girl on the bed. "She was with the group that helped Sasuke get away," he exclaimed. "She was the one that Choji stayed back to hold off. She killed him." The Hokage quirked an eyebrow at him. "And how are you so sure of that?" "I can sense her chakra. There is no way I will ever forget it," he growled, before going slightly pale and turning slowly to look at Naruto. It was one thing to sense the chakra of the more powerful shinobi in the village, but Shikamaru was absolutely terrified of the amount that the older boy had in his body. It was inhuman, and strangely enough, it held similarities to the girl's. It made the realization that he had stabbed the guy a bit more jarring. Tsunade held back a groan as she rubbed her eyes. "Perfect. A sensor type. Just what I need to deal with," she muttered. "Shikaku, you are to keep your son at your side at all times, effective immediately, until I say otherwise. The girl's identity is officially classified as an S-rank secret. You should know what will happen if either of you decides to let the information slip." Shikaku nodded in understanding before glancing at Tayuya. "And what of the girl? Mind explaining why we are caring for an enemy, Lady Hokage?" he asked. "And what about him?" he added, looking pointedly at Naruto. "What is his connection to this? I do not like to explain myself twice. Both topics will be covered in the upcoming clan meeting, which I have no doubt will be happening within the next few days, if not hours," Tsunade replied irritably. The elder Nara frowned. "I'll deal with my son. I trust that there is a reasonable explanation for this." Tsunade sighed. "As reasonable as it could be." Shikaku was quick to leave, dragging a still vengeful Shikamaru behind him as he went. Tsunade closed the door and locked it before turning to look at Naruto worriedly, her eyes set on the stab wound. "Are you all right?" Naruto offered an enthusiastic shrug. "The room is a little cold," he remarked flippantly. "Damn it, Naruto. You just got stabbed. Act a little human about it." Tsunade snapped. "Why are you here, Tsunade?" he asked bluntly. "I thought I was supposed to see you this evening about the test results." Tsunade groaned. "Well, as I was just telling Shikaku, there is no doubt going to be a clan meeting in regards to this mess, especially now that Shikamaru has just identified that girl as the one who killed Choji," she explained. Since everything is going to blow up in my face, I thought I might as well talk to you first so you have time to get out before you get dragged into this. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. That's very considerate. But I get the feeling that the clans and elders are already aware of my still being here, and will therefore be expecting me to attend, regardless of my intentions. Yes, that is most likely the case, but they can't stop you from leaving before the meeting is even called. I haven't commanded you be kept here, so there is nothing stopping you, for now anyway. The Jinchuriki nodded in understanding. Well then, what showed up in the test results? He asked. Tsunade took a deep breath. The simple answer, she is definitely not an Uzumaki. By blood anyway, she answered. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Elaborate, he said impatiently. Her bloodwork showed no matching DNA with any on-file Uzumaki DNA we have here. That being said, tissue samples did show some matching DNA. Her chakra is another story entirely. It's a complete match for an Uzumaki chakra type, the Hokage explained. You know that makes little sense, right? He asked her. I've concluded that this girl was one of Orochimaru's more elaborate test subjects. Many of her vital organs have been transplanted multiple times, but her body's ability to accept alien tissue and chakra is beyond anything I've ever seen. It could potentially be a rare Kekkei Genkei, or a genetic trait of sorts obtained through experiments. Needless to say, it is likely the sole reason she is still alive after all her injuries. Her body is simply designed for survival. Tsunade handed Naruto the test result file. While she isn't an Uzumaki, there were other things that I found that I believe you might find interesting, she said. For one, it appears as though her entire chakra network was transfused with the chakra of an Uzumaki, which, when considering her body's ability to accept foreign tissue, resulted in her adopting the unique chakra. Many of her organs also register as a DNA match to an Uzumaki, but without a sample from the donor, I can't be 100% sure. Naruto sighed in disappointment. So she's just a lab rat, he muttered, checking over the file to make sure Tsunade was telling the truth. Yes and no, the Hokage commented softly. There is something I left out of the official report. I didn't want it to be kept on file in case someone found it. You know, if you keep taking these suspenseful breaks in your explanation, I will get annoyed, he said, looking at her to continue. The blonde rolled her eyes at him. While examining the girl, I checked her reproductive organs. Normally, Orochimaru would sterilize any female subordinate he has unless he had specific intentions of breeding them. This girl is not only unsterilized, but also has the perfectly healthy reproductive organs of an Uzumaki. Technically speaking, she has the potential to give birth to full-blooded Uzumaki children. That was enough to catch Naruto's attention. He looked at her with wide eyes, glancing rapidly back and forth between Tayuya and Tsunade. Seriously. As far as I can tell, yes. Although it might not work that way. Her body's ability is still a mystery to me. She heals in a similar way to you, which makes dating the organs difficult. They could have been transplanted very recently, which could indicate that her body simply hasn't had time to adapt to them fully and absorb them completely. The DNA might potentially be rewritten to her original DNA, which could explain why there are indicators of numerous transplants. Overall, she is a medical anomaly. As for the children, they could go either way. They could take after her, or they could take after the Uzumaki whose organs she has. In case you were wondering, the chances of them being full Uzumaki would be greatly increased if you were the father, Tsunade said. The boy shook his head. Not my intention, he said quickly. But, I won't deny that it is interesting. Seems like Orochimaru is, or rather was, trying to breed some Uzumaki for his ranks. I wouldn't think that this girl was his only attempt, although she is most likely one of the few successful subjects. Her age is also convenient. Physically, I'd put her at about 16 years. While it would have been possible to impregnate her earlier, I'd guess that Orochimaru wasn't quite ready to take many chances with her. That being said though, since she is technically able to give birth with little to no complications, and since she has a high chance of producing full-blooded Uzumaki children, Tsunade trailed off. The elders will want her kept in Konoha to rebuild the clan, probably getting rid of her after they have enough children. I bet some of the clans will also be interested in her. Combining existing clans that have secret techniques and Kekkei Genkai with the extreme vitality and chakra potential of an Uzumaki would make Konoha unstoppable, Naruto guessed irritably. The Hokage looked at the girl sympathetically. If she stays here, it'll be a living hell for her. Naruto looked at Tayuya coldly. We could kill her. Make sure she couldn't be used for that, he suggested. We could, Tsunade agreed. But do you really want to? She is one of the last people alive that could potentially continue the Uzumaki clan. Killing her would be putting your family one step closer to extinction. The two remained in a tense silence for several moments, both staring thoughtfully at Tayuya. Eventually Naruto sighed. Go and sort out the clan meeting. I'll deal with the girl. Keep an Anbu squad guarding the room just in case. Will you be attending the meeting? The blonde asked curiously. You are still technically allowed to. Maybe. Tsunade accepted the answer and walked to the door, pausing just before opening it. Naruto, don't do anything rash, she said without turning around. Don't make a mistake like I did. Make sure you won't regret the decisions you make, she continued softly. Stop trying to guilt-trip me, Tsunade, he said, making her flinch slightly. But thanks for lying to the toad. Make sure to think carefully before cashing in the IOU. The woman smiled and quickly left the room. Naruto sensed the 4 chakra signatures that quickly positioned themselves at each of the potential vantage points outside the room. He groaned and scratched his head. Sauntering back over to the bed, he sat himself back on the end of it. This is going to be a really big mistake, he mumbled, looking down at Tayuya. She wasn't in any condition to be moved yet. Taking her apparent Kekkei Genkai into account, moving her wouldn't be too dangerous, but it would definitely slow down her recovery. If he were to take her and run, then he would be slowed down considerably, leaving both of them vulnerable. In the end, it was just too risky. I hope Tsunade doesn't mind cleaning up this mess. Oh well, I'll pay for it somehow, he said, drawing his sword slowly. Besides, they already took all my money. I'm sure they can afford to clean up a little blood. So this was the moment Naruto chose a different path. If you want to see what happens when Naruto stands against Konoha, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Comment below. Right finger, did Naruto make the right choice saving Tayuya, or was this the start of his downfall?